Welcome to Mex Moves, the weekly podcast where Damian Fraser and I, Eduardo García, break down the topics and headlines shaping Mexico's business, financial landscape. Damian, you're looking good. How's everything?
Very good, thank you. Hot here in Mexico City.
Oh, okay. I'm heading back pretty soon. This week, we have a great interview with Nico Girard, CEO of OXIO, the company that is purchasing Spain's Telefónica's operations in Mexico, to explain to us what the deal represents, why he's doing it. It's a fascinating conversation, as you'll hear. In addition to that, Damian and I will talk once again about the relaunch of Plan Mexico. I don't know how many we've already have, as well as some news on deregulating the Mexican economy, some positive economic data for the country that came out recently, as well as the status of bond shops, Cox Energy issuing bonds to buy Iberdrola's assets here in Mexico, and a report from Deloitte on the World Cup. So, Damian, you want to kick us off with the relaunch?
Yeah, I'm not sure it's exactly a relaunch. It was just another chapter in Plan Mexico, and this specific chapter was hosted at the Museo de Antropología. 1,000 or so business persons were there, so there was a lot of fanfare attached to it. And I think the central sort of highlight is, one, there was a big deregulation package. So if in 90 days the authorities fail to respond, your projects are automatically approved as an affirmative silence. There's a new presidential investment office, a new investment committee for strategic projects. There's a digital investment window across the SAT, much faster COFEPRIS approvals. That's for pharmaceutical companies getting drug approvals, faster energy permitting, simplified rules for generation under 20 megawatts, a kind of commitment to the SAT being less aggressive in closing businesses down that they suspect them not paying their taxes, giving back VAT refunds quicker and so on, and less kind of duplicative tax audits and less retroactive kind of application of tax laws. So this is kind of a big shopping list of things the private sector had asked for, and as far as I can tell, a large majority of those things have been agreed to, and the government sort of response, I think, was captured reasonably well by Eduardo García Gomez, the sort of investment, the czar of Claudia Sheinbaum, who at a Council of Americas event on Tuesday, which I was at, basically said, you asked us for all of this, we're giving it to you, so there are no excuses, as she said at the end. It's time for the private sector to do its bit. The government has done its bit. It was sort of the message. Now, I think I was at that event for a few hours. It was a pretty good event. The sort of general view, which I think you and I would share, Eduardo, is, one, it's great that there's this move to cut regulation, make things less bureaucratic, make the SAT less aggressive, but obviously at the same time people will say, well, that's good, but it isn't the only thing that's holding back investment in Mexico, right? And so if it was the only thing that's holding back, then Altagracia's comments would make sense. But obviously people are also worried about, more broadly speaking, the rule of law and especially post the judicial reform. They're also worried about trade policy with the US and what's going to happen with USMCA. They're also worried about, corruption and a whole host of other things, and obviously energy shortages and water shortages on a case-by-case basis can also hold back investment. So I think everyone is, very, very pleased with this big announcement of deregulation and openness to investment. But I don't think people think in and of itself it's sufficient. But hopefully, it will lead to more investment. And the government's goal is to take investment to GDP to 28% from, I think, 25%. Jorge Mendoza from Banobras was at the Council of Americas event and talks about that a lot, and how Banobras will be playing its part. And this is their this is their ace of spades. We'll see in a couple of years whether it's enough, but certainly it's better than not doing anything.
Yeah, I think the government is trying as hard as it can to do as much as it can. But like you said, it's like you're going to a fancy dinner, everything looks really nice, but then they serve you, and I'm going to say hot dogs, because that's the only thing they can provide. And I think we were expecting, or the ones that are being invited are expecting a different type of menu. I'm a bit worried that what Claudia Sheinbaum's government is trying to do, which is good in that sense, will get really frustrated later on if those investments don't take place. I don't know what the reaction will be because, like you said, Altagracia said, "Oh, we're doing everything we can. You've asked for this. Here is the list. We've checked all the right buttons." But they don't see the big picture of what's holding investment back. And those are the things that needed to be changed, and that's harder to accomplish than just eliminating some bureaucratic red tape, which, by the way, we've seen before happening, and it does help sometimes, but it's not necessarily the only element that is required for those that want to put their money in this country. So I think the coin is still up in the air. They're doing everything, but there are larger issues behind that prevent companies from coming in. So we'll have to wait.
Yeah, I think, that's obviously true. It's more than cutting red tape, although that's a big part of it. In the Council of the Americas, the finance ministry was there, the deputy finance minister, and they're coming up with new financing vehicles to invest in infrastructure, which are meeting the requirements of the big global infrastructure funds, GIP, Actis, the Canadian pension funds, many of which were at this event. And so they are kind of creating, more flexible financial vehicles. And Mendoza also talked about a whole series of tenders and infrastructure that Banobras will be participating in and wants the private sector to participate in. So it's a mixture of cutting red tape, making the SAT less aggressive. We hope there have been personnel changes there, and then having more flexible legal structures to invest in, especially in infrastructure where the big bucks are and where a lot of the constraints to growth are.
Yeah, it sounds in paper, it sounds great, and I think these are decisions that were needed. Hopefully, there will be a positive reaction to them. There is a lot of noise in Mexico. I can hear it up from here about other issues that are generating concern, like you said, the free trade agreement, judicial reform, then the aggressive measure by the U.S. Department of Justice against politicians. So I think those elements are still being important, and they cannot be necessarily totally dismissed. On the other hand, we had a few data points that were positive recently. Damian, you saw remesas bouncing back in the month of March to almost 5%, and now they've grown. They went up back to a positive trend after almost a year of being declining. We have car sales also posting their second fastest sales over a year and a half. The inflation kind of went down a little bit. So I hope this environment is also conducive for greater investment. Later on today, we have the central bank announcing its policy decision, which seems to be, again, to cut. And maybe those all elements with the state development banks helping create these instruments you mentioned, maybe these will give it a boost to an economy that in the first quarter, as we said before, has been contracting quite heavily, or lagged or contracted quite heavily.
Agreed. So moving on, Eduardo, to the World Cup. I was at a dinner last night, a Harvard dinner, and the person next to me gave a report by Deloitte on the economic impact of the World Cup. And I'm not sure exactly how fresh the report is, but I thought that it was quite realistic in saying it's not going to have a major impact on the Mexican economy. I mean, first of all, their estimate is that there are only going to be about 840,000 World Cup related tourists in Mexico, and of those, only about 280,000 are going to be international visitors. That's like the government, including Sheinbaum in the Mañanera last year, in November last year, talks about 5 million, which is obviously a ridiculous number. If you just do the maths, Mexico is hosting 13 matches. Let's say there's 60,000 average between Estadio Azteca, Monterrey, and Guadalajara, and let's say a third are international tourists, and let's say they go to 3 games. That's going to get you to less than 200,000 tourists going to the games, foreign tourists going to the games, another maybe 100,000 just coming to Mexico for the party. So you're not going to get more than sort of 300,000. The 5, no one actually knows where the 5 million number came from, but it just gets repeated. People read it online and just treat it as gospel. I think we might have mentioned it once, but Deloitte crunched the numbers, and clearly that's not going to happen. Their other point is that, obviously people will be spending more on hotels, bars, restaurants, airlines, TVs, but a lot of that spending will be spending that will just be transferred from other things that people would have spent money on. So it's not that there's going to be necessarily more net additional spending. So people will be spending less on other things and more on kind of entertainment type stuff. So overall, their estimate is that the impact on GDP is going to be about 0.14%, which is practically nothing if GDP is going to grow 1.5. It doesn't make much of a difference. I mean, and the difference with Qatar or Brazil's World Cup is most of the World Cup is in the US. It's not actually in Mexico, so it's only 13 games. B, there wasn't a big infrastructure boost in Mexico because the stadiums were already here. So there were no new stadiums being built. There were no major new rail links being built or new airports being built. So there wasn't an infrastructure boost that you saw. And as a result of that, it's going to be, comparing it to other World Cups where the whole World Cup was focused in one country is misleading.
Yeah, no, it's a different type of situation for Mexico than the U.S. The U.S. has the big chunk of the party there. Yeah, it will attract tourists. I'm glad that we're getting someone to give us a little bit more of a fact check type of analysis on what the government is saying. It might send a soft power message out abroad, and that this country is running like it is. And sometimes the bad news travels faster than the good news. So it's good that the country will be holding some of those 13 games in peace and calm, and show that people can celebrate here despite of its misgivings. But it would not be the panacea that everybody was expecting it to throw into the economic activity of the country.
So moving on, casas de empeño, or pawn shops, PAWN. There's 3 of them in the stock market that have big presence in Mexico. EasyCorp, First Cash, listed in the US, and in Mexico listed in Beaver, Globe Cash. And they're having the American ones and the Mexican one, but the American ones, which are more liquid and bigger, are having really strong performance in the stock markets. EasyCorp is up 125% in the last year. First Cash is up 70%, and EasyCorp just reported quarterly numbers yesterday, Wednesday. Their brands in Mexico are Peño Fácil y Cash Apoyo. They have other ones, but those are, I think, the main ones. Anyway, they saw gross profit up 27%, revenue up 19%, adjusted EBITDA was up, almost 80%. They have about half their stores about half their stores in Mexico. They have about 1,500 stores, or maybe 700 here in Mexico. They're in the US and Central America and UK and so on. First Cash is bigger. They have 3,300, but 1,700, so about half are in Mexico. And they've also been reporting revenue growth of 20% and cash flow growth higher. And Globe Cash, the Mexican one, which is almost the large majority of its stores, they have over 240 stores, Most of them are in Mexico. There were a few in the US, in Texas, and some in Central America. Also had revenue growth sort of over 15% and improving EBITDA margins and thus EBITDA. So what's going on? Why are these stores doing so well? I think the pawn shops do well when the economies are struggling, as people need more liquidity, and you can go and give your gold necklace or gold bars or your jewelry or your tortilla machine to any of these stores, and they'll give you credit back. So I think they are quite defensive or sort of counter-cyclical. Secondly, I think that the gold price has been very helpful because obviously the value of everyone's gold, which is a big driver in these shops, has gone up, so they can get more credit against the gold that they're giving up. So and other precious metals like silver have also gone up, and I think it also speaks to how challenging it is for people in the informal economy without any kind of official records to get credit still in Mexico. So the best way to get credit is asset-backed credit by giving up some of their jewelry or electronics goods or tools or watches, household goods, and then if they can get the money, get them back again, or if not, they get sold. So I think those are the factors behind what's been as kind of a relatively sort of unobserved kind of boom when everyone talks about fintechs. These have obviously been around for hundreds of years and still doing very well, especially in the stock market ones, the three ones in the stock market.
Yeah, it's fascinating because it's a counter-culture type of business against the fintechs that are making so much noise and inroads. I suppose some of those good numbers that you just recalled, Damian, came from the three other places where they have operations, Mexico being one of the most important ones. In the States as well, maybe it's less. We would not imagine Americans putting out their gold jewelry out to get some cash because the system here is much more democratized, if that's a way of saying that it has penetrated different circles. But yeah, both economies are struggling along. So people are in need of cash. And like you said, with gold prices at record levels, it's attractive to do it at this time. So it's a reflection, and we'll have to wait and see when we have an economy that grows again, whether these companies, like you said, are counter-cyclical and do less well that they have as they have done in the past few months.
Yeah, actually the US is surprisingly big. I went to one in Houston, owned by Globecash, and completely different product to the equivalent in Mexico. So the ones in the US, at least the ones I went to, maybe a third of the shelf space were guns, like high caliber guns. I was quite amazed, really. And then a lot of expensive sneakers, like $200 sneakers that were retailing at $600. I actually bought some. Very nice. I sometimes wear them. Hopefully, when I next see you, you'll catch them. They're about 70% down on the retail price. They look to me brand new. And then a lot of musical instruments that I guess people over enthusiastically give their 13-year-old son or daughter a piano or a guitar, who then never plays with it. And it gets pawned right away. And in Mexico, and I've been to a lot here, there's a lot more kind of agricultural tools, plasterer tools, mason tools, hammers and stuff like that, and people sort of their basic kind of working capital for their livelihoods. And a lot of people will actually leave them there on a Friday, get some money, go out to party, and then maybe get their wage on Saturday, come back on Monday, and get them back. The interest rate over a couple of days seems to be very low, and also it's safe. Because if you're going out on the town for the weekend, but you don't know what to do with your machete or with your screwdriver. So you leave it in the pawn shop. And these are the ones in Nayarit. The ones in the big cities are obviously more kind of electronic goods and gold and stuff like that. So a lot depends where you are. But it's a very good business. It generates a lot of cash, and the default rates are low because they will lend half or a third of the value of the article that's being pawned.
Fascinating. I hadn't realized that. Guns and Sneakers. That's the name of a rock and roll band, probably.
So let's move on. Slightly more prosaic subjects. Cox Energy just issued a $2 billion bond to help finance its acquisition of Iberdrola Mexico, the company. So Cox bought Iberdrola Mexico a year ago. MIP bought $6 billion of their assets, but didn't buy the company. So basically, Cox was buying what was left of Iberdrola Mexico, and also the pipeline, and also the people, 800 people. Also, the bond was apparently four times oversubscribed, and it was priced just a touch over 2032, 2036 notes at 7.1 and 7.75, so relatively tight. I mean, what's interesting here is Cox is a pretty small company. It's quoted in Beaver. It's a $250 million market cap, roughly, and they bought an asset that's almost 15 times larger than their equity market cap, and were able to pull off this very successful bond. And now they are one of the larger generators in Mexico, certainly outside CFE, probably the largest in renewable, because they took over the renewable assets of Iberdrola, but there's also some other combined cycle plants that weren't part of the package that MIP bought. So I think that's 1.4 gigawatts of cogeneration, 1.2 gigawatts of renewables, and there's a 12 gigawatt renewable development pipeline. So Cox has come from being, basically a micro cap in the stock market, also listed in the mid market in Madrid, to becoming a very key player in electricity, as Iberdrola has washed its hands of Mexico entirely to focus on Spain, obviously, and developed markets like the US.
They're using the bond to repay the loan they got to purchase the plants, I assume, right, Damian?
That's correct. So they cost them about $4 billion, and so two of that $4 billion, I think Citi, which led the bond, lent that money, and now being repaid with the proceeds from the bond, or to a large extent at least.
That's a good sign, in the sense that they have assets in Mexico. Mexico needs energy. Energy is of utmost required for the AI, the fintechs, the whole new world that we're living in. So, that's great news that they did place it without any problems, that the rate was competitive, and it's a sign again that what we said at the beginning of the podcast, in the changes that the Mexican government is trying to do to encourage people to invest, especially in energy, I would say, can or has the potential to generate great interest if they're done correctly, and if other things, as we said, change. But this is a great indicator that the appetite for transactions like this is there if the conditions are ripe.
That's right. You'll remember that Iberdrola was in a sort of permanent fight with AMLO in the previous sexenio. So it was obviously a bit awkward having at that point your largest private electricity producer in a sort of pitch battle with your president. And clearly in that type of situation, you're not going to invest more. And now, the ownership of the remaining assets, the ones that weren't sold to MIP, are in their hands. So, basically a Mexico, to a large extent, a sort of Mexico-focused company. It has assets in Spain as well, but Mexico now becomes its largest market by far, and so that's going to be its focus. And clearly they'll want to try and grow it. And they talk a lot about the pipeline. I think Iberdrola was had no interest or no hurry to explore that pipeline. So yeah, as you say, good news that it's in the hands of someone who actually likes the asset, which clearly wasn't the case with Iberdrola.
Correct.
Well, I just wanted to mention one other big bond. So,
Sure.
Which is Banamex, which is now controlled by Fernando Chico Pardo, even if Citi still has 51% of it. But from all practical purposes, it's being managed as a separate entity, and they debut their first sort of bond as Banamex. It was a 1.3 billion bond, subordinated tier 2, 2036 at about 6.7% coupon, and also its demand was apparently strong, 3 times oversubscribed, and now it's a sort of part of this process of Banamex becoming a fully independent bank, which will presumably happen next year when Citi goes below 50% through an IPO or something of that nature. And good to see that there's another Mexican bank no longer issuing through Citi.
Interesting.
So I've got quick takes just to wrap up. I don't know if you want to start or want me to go ahead.
I have one to start with about Grupo Carso, which, as we all know, is the industrial and retail arm of Carlos Slim, Mexico's wealthiest businessman, and they've increased the stake. This is another company that is moving heavily into the energy sector. They increased their stake in the oil field Sama, one of the major oil discoveries in the country in recent years. Carso paid about 75.2 million for an additional 5% in that oil field and they bought it from Harbor Energy. And now Carso, through its affiliates, Samajal, has a stake in Sama of about 17.8%, while Harbor reduces its stake to 27.3%, and Talos Energy, in which also Carlos Slim is an owner, has a 44.5%, with Pemex, the Mexican oil company, holding the rest. And the oil field is estimated to have oil reserves of about 700 million barrels. So Slim moving on with his sight on the oil sector in particular.
So more evidence of global players, in this case Harbor, exiting partly, and local players like Slim picking up the tab. And Slim obviously has a good relationship with Pemex and is probably very confident that Pemex will pay out what they owe to the minority shareholders. Last week we saw BlackRock through GIP selling most of its position in infrastructure in Savvy to Grupo México. So it's another example of the global, at least some globals exiting, and big deep-pocketed Mexicans coming in. So on my side, Tiendas 3B, the hard discounter, reported its first quarter results a bit later than the Mexican companies, as it's quoted in New York. Really strong results. First quarter revenues were up 33%. Same-store sales were up 16%. By way of comparison, ANTAD comps were about just over 1%. So they're appealing to the budget-conscious Mexican consumer that doesn't care so much about brands, because most of the products in 3B are private label. What they want is accessible goods at good quality, but at a low price, and that is really resonating with the Mexican consumer.
Correct. And on the repercussions of jet fuel prices going up, Volaris, the low-cost airline, saw a decline in its traffic in April, mainly because of that. That probably had to transport some of the higher fuel prices to ticket prices. So we're beginning to see in those companies, as well as in the airports that are trading in the stock market, the repercussions of the war in Iran and its impact on oil markets and in fuel prices in general.
That's right. OMA, which is mainly the Monterrey airport, its traffic was down 4%, for April, and Gap, which is Guadalajara, Vallarta, Tijuana, among a few others, traffic was down 8%. Vallarta still being hit by the Mencho-related violence. I think it was down by more than 20%. So a combination of, as you say, airlines cutting back, and Volaris said that it's going to be cutting routes in response to this, and maybe some weakness in the economy, which is hurting the Monterrey airport, and maybe some security concerns, which are hitting some of the beach airports, all of which is causing the airports, which have been sort of fantastic investments, to see some negative passenger growth. I have Vesta, the industrial real estate company. It's not actually a FIBRA, unlike all the other ones. It's just a normal company. Has announced yet another equity offering. It will be about $250 million. But if the green shoe is allocated, it could go up to $345 million. The stock's been reasonably strong as demand for industrial centers in Mexico remains pretty resilient. We talked last week about how kind of non-car exports are doing really well in Mexico, and that definitely helps Vesta in its northern industrial parks. And they've been doing a lot of issuance and basically putting the money to play in building these industrial parks in northern and center Mexico, and leveraging nearshoring. Let's see how the deal goes.
Correct. And finally, from me, Damian, I don't know if we've talked about it, but I think we might have. But Fibra Next is completely in the race to buy Fibra Macquarie's assets. It's the third real estate trust fund to enter the fray after Fibra Prologis said it was acquiring it, and then rival company Fibra Monterrey showed later interest in the company. According to some analysts, Fibra's next proposal is the most attractive one so far, but details remain to be disclosed. So it's still hard to know which one of the three offerings is the best and most competitive bid for the Macquarie's assets.
Yeah, last night, Fibra Monterrey raised its offer again.
Oh, wow.
So the bidding war is definitely not over. And I think their offer is good until the end of May, so there could even be further increases. So that's another more evidence of the appetite for industrial real estate and industrial parks in northern and center Mexico. And just to wrap up, MIP, which we talked about when we mentioned Cox and Iberdrola, they put out a press release that they're going to, and we had them on our call a few months ago with Jaime Guillen, one of the founding partners. They put out a press release that they're going to invest $12 billion over the next 5 years in renewables, highways, digital infrastructure. I guess that's data centers. Half is going to be funded with equity and half with debt from Afores, sovereign wealth funds, multilaterals, global investors. So MIP is, I guess, coinciding with the announcements this week on the Plan Mexico, is making a very strong kind of commitment to continuing to be a leader in infrastructure.
Great. Shall we move to our interview?
Sounds good.
I'm very happy to introduce today Nico Girard, CEO of OXIO, the company that made news just a few days ago by announcing that it's buying Movistar Mexico, the brand that the Spanish company Telefónica uses here in Mexico. Nico, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. Let me start by saying, why don't we begin with the beginning? Tell us a little bit about OXIO's existing business, the history, credentials, and the most important thing, why did you decide to buy Telefónica Mexico?
Yeah, good question. So OXIO is a fairly recent company. Like we started it in 2018. We actually started in Mexico for a lot of different historical reasons we can go into later. Primarily what we're trying to do is reinvent the telco model. We describe what we do as telecom as a service. So a little bit of a different model compared to how historically carriers have been working. where primarily, as you probably know, they deploy a lot of physical infrastructure, towers, and connect them to fiber and backhaul, and it goes to data center, and then they build a lot of real estate property, and then effectively sell access to guys like us to that property. It's very capital intensive. It's very localized, right? So you were mentioning Movistar Mexico, but Movistar historically was in every country in Latin America, for instance, and would have to build a separate network in each market and kind of operate at the local level, right? So the way it works is like if you're trying to sell access to, say, the Mexican population, the US population, and you have your own network, that's what those networks were built for. The minute you're trying to build on top of connectivity, or you have different use cases, or you're trying to innovate in one way or another, this is where things usually breaks, because the networks are kind of black boxes. They're built to deliver access for mobility users like us. And then typically you have 3 or 4 players in each market, right? So as the world is getting more and more sophisticated in terms of like building on top of global platform like AWS or Shopify or Stripe and others, who are, global platform, you can access them everywhere. It's the same API. When it comes to telco, it's really just, each country, different technology, different API, different pricing, different structure. The industry is known also for it taking a long time. So this is why, in general, there's not been too much innovation in telco. So you kind of need to rebuild this construct. I'll give you some more details on that. So on one end, we're basically a asset-light mobile carrier. We're regulated like Telcel or Verizon, we are the carrier record for our customers. But our model is like we're software only, we're asset-light, so we don't own any tower spectrum. We rent and leverages the infrastructure from others. So typically MNOs like Telcel or Verizon or AT&T. But then from there, it's if you think about the tower as being the entry door into the telecom network, if you're connected to AT&T, you can go to the AT&T network or you can go to the OXIO network at that point, and then we take care of delivering the entire connectivity solution behind it. So that side of our business is sort of like reinventing the telco layer in the cloud, AI first, global. So the SIM I have in my phone, for instance, if I connect in New York where I have a house, I will probably enter that network through a Verizon or AT&T tower. Currently in Mexico City, I'm entering right now on a Tesla tower, right? But I'm on the same network. I'm not roaming, and then my service is built on that. Then the second opportunity and what we do, will be important in the context of the acquisition of Mexico, is that telco networks are extremely rich in terms of data, right? A device is connected 24/7 to the network. If you deliver the service, you're now in control of a bazillion number of signals that if you process them through AI and machine learning, you can turn that into intelligence. And this is where you have an opportunity to actually change the model where your activities, let's say with your telecom usage, can help a financial institution to qualify you better for financial products, or can be used as a proxy for credit scoring, can be used for understanding how to reduce bad debt if there's lending. If you're a retailer, that can be helpful to the retailer to understand their relative market share with your wallet, to understand how to monetize different cohorts and different demographic status in different ways. If you're in content, you can hyper personalize your product. You can offer better targeting to your advertisers, better connection, right? So the whole idea is to say, instead of monetizing access the way carriers are doing it today, you are thinking about access as being the source of signals that you can process within privacy framework and all that, to start creating value for whoever is sponsoring the connectivity on the other side, right? And in a market like Mexico, this is the difference between the $5 ARPU, right? The average revenue per user being $5, but a cost of user acquisition being at $100 or $200, right? And so now you're effectively subsidizing connectivity in order to unlock much more valuable business intelligence.
Wow,
there's a lot of things.
That's very interesting. Before I get into that, I'm after what you have just described. do have then the question that what did you see in Telefónica here and in the Mexican market, since you're already offering some of the services that you want to probably grow,
Right.
but what did Movistar gave you that you already didn't have?
Right. So the Mexican market is super interesting, but also very difficult. Difficult in multiple ways because there's four players, Telcel, AT&T, Altan, and Movistar. Telcel being the big player with 65% market share, very company that's very very strong historically across the entire region, and they're at home here, so very strong competitor for the others. But then if you look, Altan, which was initially like a private endeavor, has been effectively merged into CFE, or at least under the control of CFE, which effectively is government owned and partially subsidized. So you have to compete against that at the bottom of the market. And if you spend time in Mexico, ever since Altan started, that basically created a pricing war in the country, right? Like the cost of connectivity has gone down. And then when we start kind of stuck in the middle, they're typically like the third player in the country, and then AT&T, who obviously is in similar position, but they have a big, wealthy big brother north of the border. So it's a very difficult position for someone like Movistar to compete, just as a setup, right? Then historically, the spectrum is actually relatively expensive in Mexico, and so if you're Verizon and your ARPU is at $50, it's one thing what you're paying for spectrum. But if you're in Mexico and your ARPU is $5 because the market is 90% prepaid, then as a function of your revenue, the spectrum becomes prohibitive, right? So before us, what they did about 5 years ago is the parent company in Spain decided to return the spectrum to the government and leverage the AT&T towers in order to reduce your cost. That's interesting, help the company, but ultimately, this is a market where you're monetizing low ARPU prepaid lines. That's the bulk of the market. And that's where, unless you change the playbook, there's no real story there, right? Like if you look in Spain, like an operator like Telefónica would bundle La Liga with connectivity. So if you want to watch soccer, you get to buy wireless from them, right? But if you don't have that type of playbook or ability to play in this market, then it's very very difficult. So they've been competing based on price, which now once you have companies like Altan or Byte, which is the MVNO from Walmart running on Altan, are extremely competitive pricing wise because they see that at an entry point into their Walmart ecosystem, then it's very very difficult. And that's where policy makes a lot of sense because one is we can operate a telco service at much lower cost than they do, which makes the company a lot more financially viable. But second, it's the opportunity to use our technology and monetizing intelligence in a market like this, where you have a very, very strong opportunity because the country is getting more and more digital. It's obviously sharing a large border with the US, a lot of young people getting into a more digital era. And this is where everyone is trying to compete on price, you compete on value effectively at that point, and we're excited about that. And we felt like the technology we have is a perfect pairing with sort of like where the company is at today. They still have 22 million subscribers, not monetizing all the time on every single month, but it's a significant slice of the Mexican market. And this is a slice of the Mexican market that's extremely hard to monetize because it's a price sensitive kind of market.
So interesting. So you're buying market share, and you will unbundle the wealth of that market with the monetizing structure that you bring that they didn't have. And so you see a business that it wasn't there and will be profitable, obviously.
Yeah, that's a little bit of the story. It's also sort of aligns very well sort of the message from the government, right? Where you want better and more connectivity, better coverage, better offerings, cheaper options, and we check the box on all of that, right? So Market share, we're really sort of buying an audience at the end that we hope to grow by we sold the technology. We've been deploying market for a long time. We have millions of enterprise SIMs on our network in Mexico. So we've been operating commercially here for, I'm saying here because I'm in Mexico City right now, but the commercially for quite some time. So we understand exactly what we can do from a cost structure. And then from there is where everyone is trying to move more towards like the postpaid, so kind of recurring lines. We actually are very comfortable playing on the bottom of the social scale with prepaid lines and turning them into loyal customers, happy customers, kind of putting a new shine on the brand that's taken some dings in the last few years because lack of investments in the network and it's just it's not the best reputation today, and but we feel we can really change that, and we're excited about it.
Two things from what you just said, Nico. On the government, on the regulatory framework that Mexico's has, how do you feel about that? Is that conducive towards what you're trying to implement here?
Yeah. So there's two things. One, it's actually important to say that we announced our intention to buy the company pending regulatory approval in Mexico, which primarily has two components. One is antitrust, and the other one is telecom regulations. We're typically the type of profile that shouldn't create any issues in that we are not dominant in the market. We're a U.S. and Mexican company. We're well known, right? It's so we have to go through a process. We don't expect any issues, but we're ahead of the process. On the other side of this, right, with some of the changes, like the two agencies are brand new, right? CNA for antitrust and CRT for regulatory kind of change with the new administration. But it's also like the message that the government has been trumpeting, right? Is sort of like the impetus for Altan in the first place, right? Be able to build more infrastructure in Mexico, reaching more people because there's a lot of people that just live outside of the main dense areas, and typically they're people that have the least amount of buying power, so it's they're not super interesting to the other carriers, and that all of a sudden you end up in a situation where a good chunk of the population is not covered by infrastructure, and we need to connect those people right one way or another. And then it's a market that's there's a lot of people like not necessarily can afford connectivity. So how do you offset cost at that point to make sure that everyone can be connected reliably and everywhere they go, right? And so this is where you need to kind of rethink the telecom model. I typically sort of kind of explain to people outside telco as more like the Google model for telecom, right? It's if you think about what Google does is building world-class experiences that attracts us to spend time on Google, on Gmail, on things of that nature, where we spend time, they learn about us, we give intent, and then they're able to repackage that and sell it to others, right? And again, like the story of OXIO is like we're not in the business of selling private data or tracking people or any of that stuff. The idea is like, let's say you're a fintech provider like a Nubank or a Spin or someone else, right? Like you are trying to find users to use your wallet and your applications. In the market of Mexico, some of those guys are spending $100 to find that user, right? But now you have qualified the users and you have 22 million of those on the other side. So now you do the matchmaking, and this is where there's an opportunity to save costs for the fintech, matching them with their ideal customer profile, and on the other side, having all that money to subsidize telecom, right? And now you can keep on doing that over and over because we're all different, right? So your preferred fintech will be different from mine. My preferred retailer will be different from yours. You're probably watching different stuff that I'm watching, and then you create all those experiences. And so now all of a sudden, the service works better because you have access to all the towers in the country. You have a brand new network in the cloud. Second, you have value add on top of your plan. It's not just, hey, I'm buying 10 gigabytes or 20 gigabytes. It's like, no, it comes with like loyalty on some retail services. It comes with a wallet. It comes with, social media zero rated. It comes with all that kind of value that you're adding to it.
That's fascinating. I got to ask you, are there any privacy laws there that might impede you from
Well,
collecting all that data, or how does it work?
yeah, it's a super important point. Like, so we're actually, I'm French originally, so our privacy law is GDPR. It's copied after like the most stringent laws in Europe, which is way above the standard in Mexico. But like privacy is sort of like core tenet for us. This is not about selling private data. This is not about location information. Anonymized data, non-trackable data is extremely valuable, so you can get the benefits of the value without violating the privacy of the user, right? And that's the sort of hard rule for us.
I was going to ask you, you talked about a new shine on the brand. So are you keeping the brand, or are we going to see a new brand in the Mexican market?
So for now, we're keeping the brand for at least 2 or 3 years. Um, Building a brand takes a long time. Movistar is a brand that is well known throughout the world, in the region, in country. It's also what we're seeking is stability. At the end, is everything we're going to be doing is under the hood for the best, or to improve the service and all this, but don't want to signal a lot of changes ultimately. Like for a user of Movistar today, uh, before and after the acquisition, they will still be on Movistar and we'll be on the same plan. And everything that they can look forward after that is better performance, better coverage, more offerings, more partnerships. Um, but fundamentally not really changing the value proposition that exists today, right? We're keeping the management team, we're keeping the employees. Like our story is not about um, stripping the company. Our story is about bringing a better technology to the company and the different ways of thinking about how to monetize their business.
Right. So for those Movistar users that are listening to, nothing will be obvious to them other than getting a better service, and then
I mean, we still have a bunch of work to do, but that's the
yeah,
goal.
there is. Yeah, I'm sure. Now, in the announcement of the acquisition, Melissa Acquisition was mentioned as a partner. Could you tell us a little bit about them and how the consortium of OXIO and Newfoundland Capital is going to work?
Yeah, the Newfoundland Capital is a hedge fund headquartered in Miami between Brazil and the States and in Miami. They are involved in a lot of infrastructure project in Latin America, and so we looked at different assets in other countries together. They tend to operate more in the south of Latin America, but we brought them to Mexico, and since we've been working on different projects together, we continued working on this one. OXIO led the process on this one. They were looking at different assets in Argentina and Uruguay and Peru and things of that nature. So they are a financial partner. Ultimately the capital and the buyer is OXIO. The way we set it up, Melissa is actually the name of the project. So that's we kept it. We liked it. But it's this is more of a byproduct of signing to closing sort of transition and putting the partnerships in place. And also one thing that worked really well in this is we've been under the radar as we're negotiating the contract. Like it's telecom is an industry where there's a lot of rumors. And Mexico is also a country that's known for liking to talk. So we use a bunch of code name and then eventually but then by the we announced under OXIO, and by the time we close, it'll be OXIO as a headline.
And are you open for anyone else to join in, or basically the partners are set in stone?
We're bringing. I mean, we're the main we're the main capital provider, but we've been partnering with a lot of Mexican corporations. Mostly because you need a coalition of partners. So in some cases they invested a little bit, some cases they're just partnering without providing capital. But the idea is, big part of it is to be surrounded by friends to be able to reboot the company, because there's some systemic issues that our technology doesn't solve necessarily, right? Distribution in a market like Mexico is very important, and so this is not something we solve with our platform in AWS, right? So you need to partner with retailers, point of sales, malls. You need to convenience stores and things of that nature. So we give them the opportunity, if they believe in the business plan, there's a great equity story for people. And so we give them the opportunity to invest, but everyone is sort of minority investor tucked behind us at that point.
You lead the consortium in that sense as the operator and the brains behind the project.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of a different model for us because we're typically more of a B2B platform. So we power offering for our customers, and then it's their brand and their users. So obviously, in this case, we're a vendor operator. One, because we think we can do well in Mexico with this asset, and kind of like building a playbook on top of our own technology. But ultimately, it's going to be managed as a subsidiary. That's why they will have their own management team. They will have their own board. We'll have a contractual relationship as a vendor with the company, but this is not like a merger between OXIO and Movistar. This is separate businesses. So we have obviously economic interest into the business, but ultimately they will be kind of like side by side with some other customers that we have.
Correct. You mentioned that in Mexico, most of the users are prepaid, or are you worried about that, or how are you going to work with the way that the industry is in Mexico right now?
I like it. I like it because this is where we have the differentiation over others, right? When as we were working on this, a lot of people say, "Hey, you're entering a market that's dominated by Telcel." That's where for the most part, a company like Movistar has been repositioning their focus more on trying to grow their postpaid users. AT&T is doing the same thing, and so on and so forth, right? Like the problem with prepaid users is they tend to be fickle if you don't build like a built-in loyalty into the program, right? Market where it's super price sensitive. So you go to Telefonia Libre at Copel, and there's a 10 peso promotion, the guy's going to switch, right? Unless you give them a reason to not switch. So it's harder to monetize a prepaid base. Typically, the ARPU is much lower, but that's actually what we relish with our model, right? And so this is part of the reason why we not only wanted to have the company be able to leverage our platform, but actually be the operator of that technology, because we have a lot of ideas on how we can do those things. And quite frankly, use it as a case study, right? It's I mean, some people have been writing about it. Our intention is not to keep on buying operators around the world. What we want is eventually be able to show a very successful case study in Mexico, and then maybe some other operator in Colombia want to hire us to
Replicate.
have the same technology and the same playbook. But you kind of need to do it well once, and we felt like this is where that was our better strategy for Mexico. It's a market we know super well as well. Like I've been personally operating here for 15 years, never full time, and but we know the market. We know we have a lot of relationships. There's a there's a great coalition of players that we can stitch together through this data story at the end, right? It's and I'm personally very interested in also helping with financial inclusion and digital inclusion, right? It's sometimes heartbreaking to see that some people don't have the same chances, or it's getting exploited sometimes because the rates are very, very high. So this is the first time that you start minting data that can be used to actually help them and de-risk, right? I tell people sometimes the story, right? There's a reason why the Apple credit cards in the US are cheaper interest rate than others, is because Apple has increased the security through technology and de-risk the value proposition, right? They will generate code every time you do a transaction. They will make sure that, the car is not lost and things of that nature. So it obviously is not Apple's story, but this is a little bit of the same thing. Is instead of being completely in the dark, trying to qualify a user that has been in a cash economy for their entire life, is now you can use telco as a proxy. And telco is a service that everyone needs to have, right? Whether you're at the bottom of the social scale or at the very top, everyone is buying connectivity one way or another. So it's like, now how do you expose that data to start benefiting that user? And that user is benefiting, it will be more loyal and pay you money, and ultimately in the long run, this is also how you monetize, right?
Good. No, it seems, Nico, that the experience you mentioned that you've been gaining over the past 15 years, as you said, is going to be turbocharged with this transaction because you will have access to 22 million people and being able to implement a case study that you have already thought about it carefully for many years and it's going to take place.
No, exactly. And once you monetize intelligence, then it's also a volumes game. So if you're NBA or NFL and you're trying to drive sports package in Mexico, well, it's interesting if you have a pool of 22 million people to play with and eventually be able to grow that pool. If you start a brand that has 50,000 users, you're not going to be interesting to those companies, right? So it's part of it is also like getting that scale so that the thesis can work, right? And create real impact on the other side.
You mentioned intelligence. Is AI anything to do with your model or how is
Yeah. At the beginning, like we call it more machine learning than AI at the time. But it's helping us in all kinds of way. Ultimately, telco produces a massive amount of data that needs to be processed in real time, right? So it's a perfect use case for AI. We're dealing with encrypted traffic, so it's also like be able to start doing correlation on behavioral patterns inside the network, and so more and more, yes, it's a big part of that. So AI for us is sort of in different ways, right? It's one, how can you continue reducing or commoditizing the network, because historically telecom is very human capital intensive. Now you can replace a lot of that with AI in some cases, right? Those are very, very complex systems that usually don't really function well together. So AI allows you to really continue optimizing, which ultimately means that you deliver the same service and the service is better because it's all coordinated through AI, and then it's cheaper, which then allows you to make it cheaper for the end user. So it's one side is like how does AI helps operating a telco network and make it better, and then AI on the other side is how do you process all that data from the telco network in order to expose intelligence on the other side, and obviously it creates makes it a lot easier and help bridge the gap with the fact that we're still a small company compared to any telco, and we can do a lot more things because we have super tools now.
Right. Yeah, it seems like you were previewing AI with what you called something differently before. I mean, you're already in the AI business before we all consumers knew about it in a way.
Yeah. I mean, it was just a different AI, right? You're building machine learning model that they're very specific to, how do you take some of the inputs from the telecom and build a financial profile, right? Do you build those model and train those models? So it's, it's different ways of working, but that was a construct. No, even when we started the company, right? It's like telco has never been disrupted at the early stage because this is a very expensive industry that requires a lot of capital, a lot of people, and typically the incumbents have been doing that for 20, 30, 40 years, right? But this is where combination of rethinking the model, running on cloud infrastructure, going on an asset-light model, which means a lot of the capital you need to deploy is to lay out fiber and deploy towers. We're writing software, and then I knew that at some point AI would give us that extra edge at some point, and quite frankly, it's a lot harder to retrofit AI into an existing network, like say Verizon or AT&T, than it is to actually build it by design from day one, right?
Now, for you, the digitalization of the financial industry, the new banks that are coming, it's music to your ears, right? I mean, the more digital things are, the more you could also help them become what they want to be.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like telco and fintech have been running to be united for a long time, right? It makes a lot of sense. Like the opportunities are in both direction, right? On one end is the more the user gets financially included in the digital experience, the better it is for us because you got to pay for a service and and whatnot. But ultimately, this is where the value exchange is interesting. One is the data that you can use in order to help profile the user and get better offerings. Two, it's security. You can help with increasing the security, the authentication of the fintech, protecting people's money, on and on and on, right? But on the flip side of that, a user that is now capable of doing digital payments, you're able to eventually get better value out of them in our model, especially, right? Because we work with partners at that point, and so yeah, it's always been like very symbiotic to me. In a market like Mexico, it's always going to be a combination of offline and online. So this is where you can't go like full digital necessarily. It's a high touch market compared to the US, for instance. People do like interacting with other human. Uh, so which is the opposite. Most of the US, like, it's like if you can just do it automatically online, they prefer that.
Scary,
Um,
but yeah.
yeah, and so this is where like you need to start building the right partnership and but yeah, like the explosion of fintech solution in this country has been nothing short of amazing, like in the last 10 years. So very encouraged to play in this. And it's a market where things needs to be financed, right? Like the device, the service. So the more they are in a digital financial rail, the better it is for everybody. Because most people don't have the money to go buy a brand new device, and so it needs to be financed. And this is where it's hard sometimes today because some of those guys run device financing at 40% APR, right? So now you're essentially paying the device twice over 2 years. So that doesn't help anybody, right? Ultimately, so the more we can contribute to reducing those rates, the better it is for everybody, and us included.
That is the magic word here. Now, to finish up, Nico, if we speak again in 2 or 3 years, what would success in Mexico look like for OXIO?
Today, the company monetizes about 1/3 of their base every month. So I would want that to be 100%. I would want to have grown the market share on the prepaid side, because I think ultimately other operators are going to be focusing more on where the value is, enterprise, postpaid, and at the cost of like not focusing on prepaid. I think we can compete there. Walmart Byte has shown that it's the power of combining distribution with telco is working really well for them. One data point that I love repeating about them is that a user of Byte consumes or pays or deploys 2.5 more at Walmart than a non-MVNO users, right? Which is exactly our thesis. Is not just in retail but across everywhere. And quite frankly, like just trying to get more people connected. Can we get to subsidies if you cannot afford it? Be able to have 100% coverage in Mexico, that kids are able to go and watch videos without having to worry about paying for it. That would be a real definition of success. Things take time. Like I'm not saying like it's magic wand the day after we get the company, but we are already worked on this for quite some time. Like this is not, we announced 2 weeks ago, but we've been working on this for quite some time. We have the partnerships in place, so we're going to try to focus first on making sure the company is more stable financially. Then second, starting to provide better service. Third, extend the coverage. We want to get to 100% coverage in Mexico, and then slowly rolling out those the new monetization, right? It's not going to be subsidized over time, but like we want to trend towards making it as cheap as possible and potentially free for a bunch of people that can't afford it.
Fantastic, Nico. Well, I think we've covered everything, unless you want to add anything else.
No, it was great. We're excited. It's a journey that a lot of us have been waiting for quite some time. So we're pretty excited to start entering the wireless market in Mexico.
Great, and we'll be in touch. See how things evolve in the future, and we'll
love to come back.
Happy to talk to you again later on. Thanks again.
Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you very much for joining Next Moves. I hope you join us next week. All the best.